The day I retired, I started dying. Not physically, worse than that. I started dying inside. Every morning I'd wake up and think, now what? Every evening I'd go to bed and think, what did I accomplish today? The answer was always nothing, and that nothing was killing me one day at a time. I'm Harold Ashford. I'm 74 years old. I retired at 65 with $11,000 in my checking account, thinking I was done working forever. What I didn't know was that retirement isn't rest, it's death in slow motion. And I almost didn't make it out alive. June 15th, 2015. That was my last day at Morrison Manufacturing. I'd worked there for 23 years, running their parts department. Good job, decent people. I thought retirement would be sleeping in, watching TV, maybe doing some fishing. I thought it would be freedom. I was wrong about everything. The first week felt like vacation. I slept until 8:30. I made pancakes on a Tuesday. I watched 3 movies in one day. I felt liberated. Week 2, I started getting restless. By week 3, I was checking the clock every hour. By week 4, I was checking it every 15 minutes. By month 2, I was dead inside. Not depressed, dead. There's a difference. Depression has emotion. This was emptiness. I'd wake up with nowhere to go, nothing important to do, no one counting on me. I'd eat breakfast and think, what's next? Then I'd eat lunch and think, what's next? Then I'd eat dinner and think, what's the point? My routine became pathetic. Up at 8:30, coffee and morning shows until 10, check the mail, maybe walk to the corner store for something I didn't need. Lunch at 11:30 because I was bored. Nap at 1, more TV. Dinner at 5, bed by 9. Repeat. I was 65 years old and I was living like I was already in the ground. The worst part wasn't the boredom, it was how other people treated me. At the grocery store, cashiers would speak slower. At the bank, tellers would explain things I'd understood for 40 years. Neighbors would pat my arm and say things like, how's retirement treating you? With this pitying smile like they were asking about my terminal illness. And that's exactly what it was, terminal. One morning in October, I stood in my bathroom, looked in the mirror, and didn't recognize the man staring back. Not because I looked older, because I looked empty. My eyes had no spark. My shoulders were slumped. I looked like a man waiting to die. That's when I realized what was happening. Society had convinced me that at 65, my productive life was over, that I'd earned the right to do nothing, that rest was my reward. But doing nothing isn't rest, it's suffocation. Before I tell you what changed everything, I need something from you. Write in the comments right now, my best years are ahead of me. If you believe that, even a little, what I'm about to share will make sense. If you don't believe it yet, write it anyway. You will. The turning point came on a Thursday in November. I was at the VA hospital for a routine checkup, sitting in the waiting room feeling sorry for myself, when this guy next to me started talking. His name was Frank, 71 years old, gray beard, bright eyes, wearing work boots covered in sawdust. He looked alive in a way I hadn't felt in months. What do you do? He asked. I'm retired, I said. He laughed. No, what do you do? Nothing, I said. I retired in June. That's when Frank said the words that saved my life. Son, you didn't retire. You quit living. I started to argue, but he held up his hand. Let me ask you something. Before you retired, who were you? I was a parts manager at Morrison Manufacturing. No, Frank said. Who were you? I thought about it. I was the guy who made sure everything worked. If a machine went down, they called me. If a part was back-ordered, I found another source. If a customer needed something yesterday, I made it happen. I was the guy who solved problems. And now? Now I'm nobody. Frank nodded. That's your problem right there. You think retirement means becoming nobody. But retirement doesn't change who you are. It just changes where you do it. He told me about his life. Retired from the Postal Service in 2009. Spent 6 months feeling useless. Then started building custom furniture in his garage. Not as a business, as himself. The same attention to detail, the same pride in his work, the same satisfaction of creating something that mattered. I'm still the same guy, Frank said. I still solve problems. I still create value. I just don't punch a clock anymore. That conversation lasted maybe 20 minutes, but it changed the next 9 years of my life. If you're still listening, if this is hitting home, hit subscribe, because what happened next is the most important thing I'll ever tell you. I drove home from the VA thinking about what Frank said. Who was I before I retired? I was a problem solver. I was reliable. I was useful. I was the guy people called when things needed to get done. Retirement hadn't taken that away. I had. By calling myself retired, I'd given myself permission to be useless. By accepting society's definition of what 65 means, I'd accepted death while I was still breathing. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't retired. I was reassigned. The next morning, instead of sleeping until 8:30, I got up at 6. Instead of watching morning shows, I walked through my neighborhood looking for problems to solve. Mrs. Peterson's fence was sagging. The stop sign on Maple Street was bent. The community garden by the library was overrun with weeds. Small problems, but problems I could solve. I spent that day fixing Mrs. Peterson's fence. Not because she asked, because I was a problem solver, and that's what problem solvers do. When she tried to pay me, I said, "I'm not a handyman, I'm Harold, and Harold fixes things." Something interesting happened while I worked on that fence. 3 neighbors stopped to talk. Not to make small talk about the weather or ask how retirement was treating me. They talked to me like I was a man with something to offer, because I was acting like one. By Christmas, I was fixing things all over the neighborhood. Not for money, for me, because that's who I was, the guy who made things work. But the real breakthrough came in January when my neighbor Carl asked if I knew anything about investments. A little, I said, which was true. I'd been reading about money since November, trying to figure out how to make my $11,000 last longer. "I've got this 401k rollover," Carl said. "My advisor wants to put it in some annuity. Says I'll get 4% guaranteed for life. But something doesn't feel right." I looked at his paperwork that night. The annuity was garbage. Fees through the roof. Surrender charges that would lock his money up for 8 years. And that 4% was before expenses. After fees, he'd be making maybe 2.5%, less than inflation. "Don't sign this," I told him the next day. That's when I learned something that changed everything. There's a principle called the identity switch. It says the word retired is the most expensive word in the English language. The moment I stopped saying it, money started flowing. Link is below. Here's what the identity switch taught me. Your identity determines your income. When I called myself retired, I made retired decisions. Conservative, scared, focused on not losing instead of winning. When I switched my identity to problem solver and value creator, I started making different decisions. Instead of helping Carl avoid a bad investment, I helped him find a good one. Instead of hiding my $11,000 under a mattress, I started putting it to work. Instead of accepting that 65 meant the end of my earning years, I realized it meant the beginning of my best ones. By March, I wasn't just fixing fences anymore. I was helping neighbors with their investments. Not as a financial advisor. I'm not licensed for that. As Harold, the guy who reads the fine print, the guy who asks the right questions, the guy who smells something fishy before anyone else. Carl made $8,400 in the first 6 months after switching from that annuity to a simple index fund strategy I showed him. Mrs. Peterson saved $200 a month on her Medicare supplement after I helped her shop around. My neighbor Bill avoided losing $15,000 to a gold coin scammer after I showed him what to look for. And something amazing started happening. These people wanted to pay me, not for investment advice, for my time, for my knowledge, for my ability to see through the nonsense that targets people our age. By summer, I was making more money than I'd ever made at Morrison Manufacturing. Not from one big thing, but from being myself, the problem solver, the guy who makes things work. By the end of 2016, my $11,000 had grown to $73,000. By 2017, I'd crossed 6 figures. By 2018, I was debt-free with money in the bank and income coming in every month. All because I stopped being retired and started being me. The people around me started calling it a miracle, but it wasn't a miracle. It was identity. The moment I stopped thinking of myself as a 65-year-old retiree and started thinking of myself as a 65-year-old problem solver, everything changed. Here's what nobody tells you about retirement. It's not an age, it's a mindset. And that mindset is poison. When you say I'm retired, you're telling the world and yourself that your productive years are over, that you're no longer useful, that you're waiting to die. When you say I'm reassigned, you're telling the world that you've got new projects, new challenges, new ways to create value. Same person, same skills, same experience, completely different results. Everything I learned, the identity switch, the morning $500 rule, the zero savings law, all 7 of them. They're in something called the Wealth After 65 Code. I wish someone had given me this when I retired with $11,000 in my account. The link is right below this video. But here's the thing about the identity switch. It works instantly. The moment you stop calling yourself retired, other people stop treating you like you're retired. The moment you start solving problems again, opportunities start showing up. I'm not talking about going back to work. I'm talking about going back to being yourself. The person you were before society convinced you that 65 meant obsolete. Carl tried the identity switch in March of 2017. By December, he was making $3,000 a month helping other retirees organize their Medicare options. Not because he became an insurance agent, because he became Carl again. The guy who pays attention to details and explains things clearly. My church friend Bill tried it 6 months later. He'd been a mechanic for 30 years. Instead of retiring from cars, he retired to restoration. Classic cars, antique tractors, anything with an engine that needed love. He makes more money now than he did at the dealership. Mrs. Peterson tried it last year. She'd been a teacher. Instead of retiring from education, she retired to tutoring. 3 kids every afternoon, $40 an hour. She's booked solid through June. None of them went back to their old jobs. They went back to their old selves. The selves that society told them to bury at 65. The day I retired, I started dying because I believed retirement meant becoming nobody. The day I realized I could be somebody again, I started living. Here's the lesson. Age doesn't make you irrelevant. Accepting irrelevance makes you irrelevant. You have skills. You have experience. You have knowledge that took decades to accumulate. None of that disappears at 65. But if you call yourself retired, you give the world permission to ignore all of it. Stop calling yourself retired. Start calling yourself reassigned. Stop thinking about what you're too old to do. Start thinking about what you're finally free to do. Stop waiting for someone to tell you that you matter. Start mattering. Do me a favor. Write in the comments, "I refuse to be average," because average at 65 is broke, bored, and waiting to die. And you're not going to be average. 65 isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your best chapter. And the best chapters always start when the hero stops accepting what everyone else thinks is possible.